One of the demand is that, release of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu unconditionally,
Yes.
and to demilitarize the southeast. And again,
Yes.
I mean, conversations have been ongoing with regards to releasing Nnamdi Kanu. However, is it just down to the executive? What about the state government of the southeastern region, the governors themselves? Do you think that they have a part to play in this as well, in terms of the demand for good governance and ending bad governance?
No, I completely agree with you, and we have made it very clear in the updated demands that everybody that is protesting must also go after their state government.
Hello, my great and wonderful people. We welcome you once again to our today's episode of this program. And today we get some videos for our team. We're going to be one quickly the review to you concerning the things going to be say if they happen right now for inside this country, Nigeria. I beg pay attention to this video. The first one will be say one quickly the review to you. Now the one will be say you just see from the introduction of this very broadcast will be say with the receive from Omoyele Sowere. Yes, the one will be say take come outside of recent to speak concerning the warming up of protests when it be say they assume or perceive to be nationwide, and the procedures when it be say these protests will take. And also for this very interview, it come aside to review to Nigerians the things when it be say we need to prepare ourselves for if this protest eventually begins. I beg pay attention to this video, and after this one we equally get others when it be say we dey review to you one after the other. You watch this one first because of time. We'll come back for more.
One of the demand is that release of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu unconditionally,
Yes.
and to demilitarize the southeast. And again,
Yes.
I mean, conversations have been ongoing with regards to releasing Nnamdi Kanu. However, is it just down to the executive? What about the state government of the southeastern region, the governors themselves? Do you think that they have a part to play in this as well, in terms of the demand for good governance and ending bad governance?
No, I completely agree with you, and we have made it very clear in the updated demands that everybody that is protesting must also go after their state government. Because if you look at what the governors are doing in destroying the economies of their state, in corruption and looting and public waste, you would know that it should not be spared at all. I mentioned earlier how governors roll around. There are governors in Nigeria who don't even live in their state capitals, live in Abuja. And I heard one of them make a foolish statement today that this hardship that is going on, I think is the one from Taraba, that the hardship that's going on in the country is the act of God. It's not the act of God, it's the act of man, governors. And those who are governing Nigeria. So these governors must be taught a lesson as well. As we are teaching the federal a lesson, everybody should go to their state government house, protest against them. Make sure that we get rid of what they call security vote, which is one of their biggest sources of corruption in government houses. We have asked the people of Kogi State, for instance, just one instance, to go to the government house and force their former governor to be delivered to EFCC as a way of teaching former governors lessons. That
all right, my great and wonderful people. I believe so all of you don't hear that very one from Omoyele Sowere. And he own take from this very issue of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu when they say the federal government of Nigeria no one agree remove their hand from your own waist to let her go, even upon all the decisions of the Supreme Court of Nigeria, even to the appeal courts. Now, apart from that, una equally still see it all stand concerning the protests when we say it they warm up from every corner of this country concerning the hunger when it be say it day for the ground. And the instruction when it be say in they give out to make sure say Nigerians we gather ourselves together to start from the body of the governors of each state. If we want protest, we make sure say we make the houses, the residence, and the apartments of governors and their own vices as a point of contact. All right, I will leave you to share your own take concerning that very decision of Omoyele Sowere, even as we take you down to this other video when we see with the receive from Barrister Dele Farotimi. I believe say this one when we see with the receive from Barrister Dele Farotimi now something when we see still contribute to this vision when it be say it keep all of us for this state when it be say we day to day when it dey make Omoyele Sowere they talk waiting it they talk right now. You listen to this very one from Barrister Dele Farotimi. I will come back for more.
The challenge with Nigeria is that we almost always have concepts and precepts, ideas and principles imported from foreign lands, and they come to Nigeria and they become Nigerian. And I'm sorry to say, but when we say it becomes Nigerian, what we are saying essentially is that it becomes insane. The totality of the idea becomes something radically different from what the originators intended. So when you say feudal republic of Nigeria, obviously I'm playing on the lie that Nigeria has told itself since 1966, and that is the lie of federalism. So instead of saying federalism, I'm calling it what I know it to truly be, which is feudalism. But in order for us to understand ourselves, I think it is only right and proper that we should attempt to define some of these precepts, and then we can then get around to the business of tying up the loose ends. So even though it is not present there, it is necessary that we have a clear understanding of what federalism is, because that is the word that I have taken out, essentially, federal, feudal. So now, what is federalism? Federalism is essentially a system of governance that allows co-independent and codependent units to come together and operate within a nation state or a state. Now, that's all big grammar, Dogonturenchi, but if you break it down to brass tacks, what it means is that you have a system of governance, a structure of governance where you have a central government and then you have federating units. These federating units are largely independent of the central government, but the central government has control over spelt out powers and areas of national life. So it's not something uniquely Nigerian, it is a global concept. And in the first part of this talk, I'd actually explained the origin, how it took Chief Obafemi Awolowo to propose federalism as a compromise between the two extremes that were present at the time in the lead up to the 1954 Constitution. What you had was a situation where Zeke, the nationalist, wanted a unitary system, which was essentially what the British had run with originally, which was why Obafemi Awolowo and the Western region essentially staged a walkout from the operation of the 1946 Richards Constitution, which attempted to foist federalism on Nigeria. And then you had the Ahmadu Bello extreme, which wasn't prepared to be in a country where it will be subject to the control of anyone other than the North. So Obafemi Awolowo proposed a middle ground, and that middle ground was federalism, which allowed each region to run at its own pace and to evolve at its own pace. And that middle ground was the introduction of federalism into Nigeria. And in that federal Nigeria that was found and essentially began its construction largely from 1954, what you found very quickly was that each region had its own constitution. Each region had complete control over local government. I stand to be corrected, but I know as a fact that the southern part of Nigeria had by far more local government than the northern part of Nigeria, by far more. I believe, even though I cannot vouch for this now unless I do a little more research, But I believe it is correct to say that the Western region actually had more local governments than a combination of the Eastern and Northern region, because local governments were not centered, one, for the distribution of revenue. It never was. It was just a place for the regions to use as a point of contact with their people and as a basis for development. That was what they were. They were administrative units created by regions. They had nothing to do with revenue allocation. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So you had a situation where the federating regions at the beginning each had control over their space, over even revenue to a very large extent. It was derivation. So we had a true federal system beginning from 1954, and this subsisted essentially for 12 years. Because by the end of the second coup of 1966, every pretense at federalism has been abandoned. Effectively, when you look to the reality, what has happened is that federalism is non-existent in Nigeria as things stand today, because we have moved further and further away from the federation that was inaugurated in negotiating the existence of Nigeria. I will not spend time dealing with the histories. As I have said, you will find this in the first part. But the critical thing to understand is this. In 1960, the Nigerian Federation or the Nigerian state would not have existed if there hadn't been an agreement amongst the constituent units to have a federation, because nobody was prepared to live in a unitary Nigeria. The North was not prepared to live in a unitary Nigeria. He made it clear, abundantly clear. Ahmadu Bello was prepared for the North to go alone rather than to become part of a unitary Nigeria. Obafemi Awolowo demonstrated the readiness of the western part of Nigeria to walk away from the Nigerian state if it wasn't prepared to find a middle ground apart from the unitary system. This is evident from the boycott of the federal parliament by the Action Group upon the introduction of the 1946 Constitution. So you have a situation where the one thing practically everyone could agree on at the foundation of Nigeria is that they do not desire a unitary system for the governance of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious entity called Nigeria. So, when the military incursion began in January, the death knell was sounded for federalism. This is necessarily so because the command structure of the army couldn't have accommodated a federal structure. Everything had to be centralized. In the immediate aftermath of the coup, of the second coup and the beginning of the civil wars, almost all resources had to be federalized, which began the journey to the over-centralization of powers in the federal government and the beginning of the transition to a feudal system. I will not spend too much time on the histories of Nigerian federalism, but it is critical to touch on it, and I have. But it is now even more important to speak to the feudal nature of the country that we have evolved. But what is feudalism? It is critical that we have a clear understanding of feudalism. So because of these, I will again take a brief excursion into history in order to give you the foundation for the discourse. However, go and watch the first part of this video. Now, feudalism is not particularly new to the country called Nigeria. In the lands that were eventually cobbled together and christened Nigeria by Lugard Zolosho Flora, there were in existence two feudal states or feudal empires. One was the Kanem Borno Empire. The second was the Sokoto Caliphate. These two empires predated the British by at least 100 years in the case of the Sokoto Caliphate. And in the case of the Borno Empire, probably by as many as about 200 years. They were here long before the British were here. The vast part of Nigeria, known as Northern Nigeria, contained parts, only parts of those two empires. They were largely slave trading empires, and they existed on the platform of feudalism. Feudalism is about the acceptable non-equality of people who live in a geographical space. What do I mean? It speaks to a multiple level of residency, because you cannot speak to citizenship in the absence of the equality of rights. But in feudal states, there is a ruling class which is superior over and above the remaining two classes, which are made up essentially of one, those who serve the ruling class and communicate between the ruling class and the underclass, which are the serfs. So in that class, you have the merchant class, you have the military class. Sometimes there can be a level of class migration, very rarely, because the class structures are very rigid. So you have the ruling class, those who serve the ruling class and work for the ruling class in dealing with the underclass. So you have highly stratified societies, and these were the things, this was what was in place already in northern Nigeria before the British came. So by the time the British came, the British merely layered on existing structures that they found within the Nigerian space. So in doing this, you had a situation where in northern Nigeria, vast parts that were never fully conquered, deliberately so, because if they had conquered these parts, they would have had to stop enslaving them. These parts were placed under emirs. You need to go to the first part of this speech. You'll find it there. And this is to explain how feudalism was deliberately allowed to thrive even after the coming of the British. Indirect rule meant that emirs who didn't have powers over certain parts that they had never conquered were given powers over those parts. Chiefs were subjugated to emirs. In eastern Nigeria, where Igbos do not have kings, warrant chiefs were created to serve the interest of the British. Warrant chiefs. In the West, where the Yorubas had an established monarchical system of governance, not feudal, monarchical, and the Yorubas had evolved such sophisticated societies that you can actually speak to citizenship in Yoruba traditions. Because, for instance, Yorubas will tell you that ibita bí ẹrú la bí ọmọ, tá bá ń torí ẹrú ṣòfin, kárántí ọjọ́ tí ó mọ̀ọ́mọ̀ joyè. As we birth the commoner or the slave, so are the highborns also battered. That is a Yoruba proverb. The other one says, when you're making rules with the children of the slave in your mind, on your mind, remember the day when the same laws will catch your own children. These are Yoruba proverbs that offers a peek into the egalitarian society that they had evolved. No Oba had absolute powers. In truth, over any Yoruba person. Oba had his property, the other person had his property, and the Oba is obliged to respect the property rights of his subjects. So, you had a situation where pre-independence, the British had evolved a system that discounted citizenship as long as the people followed the rules that the British had laid down. How the locals enforced this rule, collected taxes to a very large extent, was in their business. If you have been fortunate enough to watch the cinematic offering, Olufunlayo Ransom Kuti, you would have an idea of the level of citizen participation from the average Yoruba person pre-independence, pre-colonial times. But this mishmash of nationalities cobbled together agreed at the beginning of the Nigerian experiment that there should be a federation, but that federation, as I have said already, is dead to be replaced by feudalism. So this feudalism that I have spoken to, how has it arisen? What does it mean for us? How does it really operate? What does it mean? As I have said already, feudalism is essentially about the acceptable non-equality of those who live within the same geographical space, but it also means that the law simply does not rule in such a space. Now, when you look at the feudal states that were in existence before the coming of Nigeria, and then you look at feudalism as a classic concept, and then you have to come quickly to the understanding that there are three pivots upon which feudalism rests in Nigeria, because we're about the last of the feudal states remaining in the world, and ours is being modernized even as it races back into the Middle Ages. So what does it rest upon? The first is weaponized ignorance, the acceptable stupefaction of those who should be citizens in order to condition them to accept each and every evil that the state propagates is evident within the Nigerian space. Nigeria spends little or nothing on education, has over 15 million children, youth, slapping the streets unemployed, school age, not going to school, has a massive population of youth unfit for any gainful employment of any sort because they have not been offered any training of any sort. No training, nothing. Largely drug addicted. That is not by accident. It is a tool of feudalism, weaponized ignorance. But aligned to weaponized ignorance is weaponized poverty. When a man is impoverished in his mind, when he is rendered ignorant, when he has become stupefied, when he has been rendered incapable of using his God-given imagination to think his way out of his limitations, then he becomes susceptible to poverty. But when you now have these aligned to institutional measures to assure that the person is perpetually kept underfoot and incapable of raising himself by any bootstrap because he has no bootstrap in the first place, you then begin to understand the nature of the evil that has been unleashed against the Nigerian. How? How to explain? There is no access to credit. No access to credit for the poor man in a society that claims to be capitalist. No access to credit. And I'm not just talking about the poor man, even those who are meant to be members of the middle class. The cheapest facility available to any Nigerian today is in excess of 30% interest. That is the cheapest available to any Nigerian, and no Nigerian bank institutionally can lend you money based on an idea. It's not possible. Even if there are interventionist funding available, you still have to go through the commercial banks, and the commercial bank has a primary duty to ensure that your loan is collateralized. That is one. Secondly, almost all legitimate opportunities have been closed off. Every opportunity that the youth might find for self-actualization, for enrichment, for wealth, is closed off. Somebody is going to go put it. The system would license someone to have a toll gate so that the wealth, however little that these imaginative young persons might make, eventually comes back to the system. I need not speak too long. Look at what they are doing with the UAE thing. After shamelessly posturing for over a year about how they have reopened the Dubai route to Nigerians, I don't know what anybody is looking for in that place. Yeah, it's a beautiful country, but they are more than racist. Theirs is even worse. But at the end of the day, Nigerians need some escape. And what have they done again? Find a way to put a toll gate there so that the Nigerian desirous of traveling to UAE pays through his nose. They don't even think about the effect these have on our country, the image of the country. And yet they'll be talking about Hush Puppy, and there is Hush Daddy, Hush Dom, Hush Bingo, Hush everything up and down the place. The system ensures that, one, there is no light. You don't have public power supply. There is energy poverty. To even power generator in order to do anything productive is next to impossible. The multiple taxes that are there to squeeze anyone who is able to do anything is almost like trying to grow something on rocky surfaces. Nigeria appears to have become a killing field for ideas, for ingenuity. The average person who should be thinking of starting industries are thinking that their monies are better invested in running away from the country. That is the level of weaponized poverty that has been unleashed. People are not migrating, they are escaping because the system has deliberately weaponized poverty against those living in the environment.
All right, my great and wonderful people. I believe say you don't hear everything from the mouth of Barrister Dele Farotimi concerning this recent video when it be say he bring commerce concerning the situation when it be say all of us there today and the roots of that situation. If truly all of us want solution to the problems when it be say all of us they face, for sure, without it be say we not miss our words. We know say each and every one of us know what we supposed to do to resolve that issue. But based on say if they favor some, now some they cry, now it make all of us today for inside this mess today. The time when it be say all of us will come to that very point where it be say it go they affect the big as it they affect the small, then I believe say all of us will definitely know what to do. All right, I'll leave you to share your own opinion with us in the comment section, even as we draw the line of this broadcast here. We will see you again when we see you. Remember, we love you all. Bye-bye.